Hi everyone, and welcome to our public climate school lesson on migration and climate change. It's really great to see that so many of you have tuned in, and especially big thank you to all your teachers who are joining our lesson here with your students during your classes. My name is Charlie. I'm part of the public climate school team, and I have the great honor of moderating this lesson today. I'm already really excited for the lesson because we have a very special guest, Rubana Mussharat, who will be giving us her expert insight into the question of what does migration have to do with climate change? How is Bangladesh especially affected by climate change? And what can we maybe do to help fight for climate justice? Before we start with the lesson, I have a little content note because we will be talking about forced migration in the next 45 minutes, and also of the actual impacts that climate change and extreme weather events have on the lives of people. So if you feel uncomfortable with this topic in any way, or just want to tune out, feel free to leave the classroom, the virtual room, and yeah, let's just all respect each other's needs and have a great lesson. Um, then I have one other thing before we start, because you might notice a banner right here in the video with a Menti link. And Menti is the tool we use to communicate with you. So over the course of the lesson, we will ask you questions via Menti, but you can also ask us, and especially Rubana, questions back via the Q&A function. So just take out your phones, type in the Menti link, and then we'll be ready to go with our lesson, which consists of a short warm-up, and then the bigger part will be the expert interview with Rubana, where you could also ask the questions. So migration and climate change. For me, climate change is always like this really big and abstract concept, and we have like numbers, for instance, the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. We have big words like greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't know how you feel, but I myself have also noticed climate change impacts over the last few years. So I have the feeling that it's getting warmer in the summer. And also we have less and less snow. And I also feel like we have more floods and everything in Europe. But still, these impacts of climate change can be considered moderate comparing to other countries, because especially countries in Asia or in Africa are feeling the impacts of climate change really hard right now. So climate change leads to really big floods, to droughts, to heat waves, and also leading to food and water scarcity. And this is exactly the reason why we want to dive deeper into this topic of what effect does the climate change have on the lives of people today, with a focus on the big question of can climate change also lead to migration, and what does that mean for especially vulnerable people. Um, yeah, but before we start, I already said climate change might be a really abstract concept, and we thought it would be an interesting task to put ourselves in the shoes of a person affected by climate change. So I want to share my screen right now and show you this picture. This is Joydeep, and Joydeep is a rice farmer in the south of Bangladesh, where he has a bit less than an acre of land, which he farms there every day. And then one day there is a flash flood, and his whole land is flooded by water, and he has no idea how long, I guess probably for a few weeks, but he can't do his farming, and we have no idea what the flood will do to his land and his soil afterwards. So our question is, imagine you're Joydeep and your land is flooded. What are your possibilities? What can you do right now? And maybe you can talk about this question with your partner, with your neighbor for a few minutes, and then answer the question in the Menti link, and we'll talk about that. Okay, and while we're waiting for the Menti answers to come in, I want to introduce you to our special guest, Rubana Mussharat. And Rubana is a workshop organizer. She's a researcher and expert in intercultural communication. And right now, she's doing her master degree in migration and intercultural relations in Berlin. And she has agreed to be here with us today. Rubana, thank you that you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. We're still waiting for the answers to the question to come in. How are you today, Rubana?
I'm good, excited, a bit nervous.
Okay, so now with the short time lag, a few answers are coming in. So the students have answered the question, what will happen to Joydeep if his land is flooded? And one answer was to leave the country, um, and then to find different ways to deal with the whole thing. So maybe adapt to the impacts of, yeah, the flood. Yeah, and probably we'll, in the course of the lesson, we can answer the question better, what people can do when their land is affected by climate change. But first, we'll start with getting more expertise from you with our interview. And over the next 15 minutes, we'll just talk about what's migration, what's climate change, and clear the basics. And then you students, you can also ask questions via the Menti to Rubana. And then in the last 15 minutes of the lesson, we can answer these expert questions. Mm, so the first question I have for you, Rubana, is about migration, because you study migration and international relations. So can you maybe explain to us what migration actually is and what different types of migration are there?
So, first of all, migration in general is understood as the movement of people. So, there is no universally agreed definition of migration, so to say. What we have are some working definitions. According to International Organization of Migration, it is the a migrant can be defined as a person who moves away from his or her place of usual residence, whether within a country or across an international border, either temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of reasons. So, from this definition, we can see that it is essentially open ended because it doesn't give one a specific timeline, like how long a person has to be outside of his or her natural habitat in order to be considered a migrant, then the intention of the migration, whether he or she is forced or there is a voluntary intention behind it, or what can be the reasons, and also the geographic location where that person is migrating to. So if we look into the intentions or the reasons of migrations, there are two types of migrants. One is voluntary migration, where people have an agency to make the decisions that, okay, we want to move. And another is called forced migration, where the person doesn't necessarily want to move, but he or she is forced due to certain circumstances. And then there is, in terms of geography, there we have internal migration and external migration. The internal migration is when a person moves within the national border of a country, and external migration is when someone moves outside of the country. And that brings us to the question of what a refugee is, right? We hear this word left and right. What is a refugee? Unlike migrant, refugee actually has a legal definition because after Second World War, the all the nations in the world they gathered and decided that just for the virtue of being a human being, one has the right of the protection of his or her life. So, in order to ensure that, humankind for the first time came up with this International Refugee Convention in 1951. And according to UNHCR, the UN organization that works on the global refugees, a refugee is defined as someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political reasons or political opinion. So, according to this definition, we see two things. One person needs to be out across the national border in order to be granted asylum or receive the refugee status. And there are certain reasons which are stated where a person can be granted asylum on. And what's the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee is that any person can seek an asylum. Like if a person thinks that his or her life is under threat in his or her own country of origin, then he or she can cross the national border. That is the first and foremost condition. If someone is in Iran and he or she feels threat on his or her life, he or she cannot seek asylum to Germany from within Iran. He or she has to cross the border, national border, to Turkey, to Iraq, or Azerbaijan, to a safe country, so-called safe country, and have to ask for asylum. And when he or she asks for that asylum, he or she is called an asylum seeker. And then there is this concept of well-founded fear, and that is quantified or assessed by the country where he or she is seeking the asylum to. So if he or she seeks asylum from Germany, Germany will decide if the fear is well grounded. And once that is solidified within the legal framework of Germany, then he or she is granted asylum. Then legally he or she can be called a refugee. An asylum seeker is not automatically a refugee. Refugee has a legal status and rights. And according to this convention in 1951, not all the countries are actually signatories of this convention, unfortunately. The countries who are, they are legally obligated to provide legal protection to their refugees. Some of the countries who actually are not signatories of this convention host the largest number of refugees in the world, surprisingly. One of them is actually Bangladesh. So
Wow.
Bangladesh,
Yeah.
yes, Bangladesh did not sign the International Convention of Refugee, yet Bangladesh hosts one of the largest refugee groups in the world. And what happens? All the related legal works are conducted by UNHCR through mutual understanding of these host countries. For example, Jordan processes its refugees through UNHCR. Bangladesh does the same, and so on and so forth. So this is just some. I hope that I could explain it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, like the legal definition of what a refugee and an asylum seeker is. And because this lesson is on climate change and migration, so can you maybe say what climate change has to do with this whole concept of migration?
So if we look at the legal definition of refugee, once again, is there, that within those reasons where a person can be granted asylum, there is no mention of climate. So this legal definition was adopted in 1951, and there was a protocol established in 1967 that how a refugee will be processed, but there is no mention of climate change as a possible cause based on where a person can be asked for asylum. But we get this idea of climate refugee. There is no legal definition or acceptable idea of what a climate refugee is. As far as legality concerned, there is no terminology such as climate refugee.
Okay, and but would you say there are climate refugees, even if it's not a legal term? Because, yeah, one of the answers, with the rice farmer in Bangladesh was also that the farmer would have to leave the country or maybe move, inside of this country. And would you say that that is happening right now, to people?
So it the thing with climate refugee is that, or I would say, person who is subjected to displacement due to climate related disasters. I know it is a mouthful, but it is more accurate to use the terms because the way we define people is the way we treat them, right? So the people who are subjected to displacement due to climate change, they are not legally protected by the nations, even the signatories of this refugee convention. So if a person wants to move, claiming that he or she has lost his or her livelihood or place of living due to a flash flood or due to climate change, or there is a scarcity of resources, for example, water or land, there is no way a person can legally seek asylum. They will be treated as these so-called economic migrants. You see, and it is really difficult to quantify climate change as a reason for migration because it is possible that climate change itself is not the direct cause, rather an amplifier or a catalyst to the reasons which are already existing. For example, if there is already a scarcity of clean water, if people are displaced, then there will be even a more scarcity, and that might cause social unrest, political unrest. So that might cause people to move externally. And it's not the first thing that comes to people's mind when they move from one place to another. As a matter of fact, 70% of people who have to move outside, like right now, I think according to UNHCR, about 25 million people who are registered as refugee, and this number is arbitrary because there are also a lot of unregistered and who are not recognized as refugees, because I have established that there is a difference between asylum seeker and refugee, right? So 70% of these people actually move first towards the uh, neighboring countries. People do not just automatically think Germany or the US. First, they move the places they already know. If someone is living in an island, they move to another island, then to the bigger cities of that country, and then they move externally.
Okay, thank you. So, because one answer to what, Joydeep can do was also ask the government for help, but, so now you explained, that it's really difficult to say, okay, hey, I'm affected by climate change and that's why I have to migrate, because there's like no legal definition, and the causality is also very hard to establish, because people would probably just say, okay, there was a flood, and that's why I had to migrate and not, because of climate change. So, can you maybe dive deeper into, um, like what effects the climate change has on, Bangladesh and give a few details there or explain?
Yes, of course. So the thing with the climate-induced uh, like migration pattern is that it is unpredictable and it is exponential. So from the year 2008 to 2022, there was an increase of people who were displaced due to climate change, and the number was 42%. That is humongous. And there, as per this estimation, by the year 2050, around 1.2 billion people will be subjected to climate related displacement. And that is happening right now. In the year 2020, like 2022, disasters triggered a record number of 32.6 million internal displacement worldwide. And in Bangladesh, uh, in 2020, around 4.4 million people were displaced internally due to climate change. If we look into the numbers from the year 2008, over 376 million people were displaced because of climate change. And among all the refugees in the world, 60% of them are living in the countries who are in direct threat of who will be subjected to climate change in the future.
That's a lot. That makes me feel kind of very anxious. And so, because one thing is that climate change, as you already said, mostly affects the vulnerable countries, and also then the people there are vulnerable. And can you maybe explain more what, yeah, the concept of vulnerability has to do with migration and climate change, and if there are like differences also between people in Bangladesh who are more vulnerable and less vulnerable?
Well, the thing with vulnerability is it is rather subjective. For example, some countries where natural disasters are more common than the others. For example, Bangladesh has like cyclone, earthquake, flood, river erosion, you name it, we have it. But what matters is the frequency of how how frequently it's occurring. Earlier, for example, people who used to live in the river sides or in the river islands, they used to migrate probably once in their lifetime, once in a generation, because of river erosion. And now the number has increased to 2 to 3 times or even 4 times. So they literally have to take their whole lives and shift. And most of the time, these people are either fishermen or uh, farmers who are already living on their fringes. So that causes a lot of economic strains. And adding to this, a lot of agrarian cultures are kind of depend on weather pattern in order to sustain. Like it causes a lot of food scarcity. The land where people could grow crops now, due to the increase of sea level, their salinity and their pH level has uh, uh, changed, so they cannot grow those crops anymore. Or people who used to fish in certain areas, they don't have enough fishes anymore. And again, about unpredictability, couple of months ago there is a snake called Russell's viper. So the number of Russell's viper in Bangladesh increased like by a lot. It is an indigenous snake, but it was not that many before, suddenly like Russell's vipers are everywhere and people are dying from snake bite. So the environmentalists, they theorized that because of climate change, the our environment has a way of balancing it out for better or for worse. Due to climate change, a lot of animals lost their habitats and there was a shift in the equilibrium, so number of Russell's viper increased. So this is one of the consequences of our natural ecosystem because of climate change.
Yeah, okay. Wow, that's interesting. And scary. So maybe because we have like yeah, 15 minutes left, and maybe we can switch to the questions asked by the students and further questions. So, and to you students, if you have any other questions, just feel free to type them into the Menti, and then I can ask Rubana the question. So, one question we've already talked about a bit is like another basic one. So, can you say which countries are affected most by climate change?
Well, usually it is the low-lying countries, for example, and Bangladesh, and then some island nations like Maldives, Polynesian Islands, and also it is climate change is unpredictable. Every country faces it differently, and the scope of how people kind of deal with climate change is also different. For example, we could not really spot, like, we could not know the extent that the flash flood in Valencia would affect people or the flood in northern Westphalen. So people they were vulnerable, you see, even though they were from the Western world with all the amenities, but it did not protect them from being victim of climate change. And then in the Sahel region in Africa, for example, the droughts are getting longer and people have to move from one place to another. And are seeing a increasing number of political and social unrest there because of this scarcity of resources. So every country experiences it differently.
Hey, thank you. And maybe also connecting to that question, a personal question, would you say you are affected by climate change?
Well, it is quite difficult to answer because I have always been a city dweller. And what I have experienced is that the number of people have increased in Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh. What happens is that people from all over the country, they are first moving from smaller cities, and when, like, not from smaller cities, rather like places they know the surrounding of, let's just put it in that way. And when they cannot survive there or they're becoming overcrowded, they are moving to the bigger cities. In Bangladesh is Dhaka. So for economic opportunities, it is very easy to brush them off as economic migrants. But if you look deeper into it, it's not a fun experience for them because where they live are slums, like shanties, and the situation they are living in is extremely unhygienic and unsanitary, not to mention unsustainable, and that is putting the whole city in a lot of strain. We can see that the buildings are developing abruptly without any consideration of environmental protection or the water drainage system. So even there is a small amount of rain, it is the whole city is clogged by water. There is, like, every year there are like endemic of different waterborne and mosquito-borne diseases, and that is a way of climate adaptation, I would say. Like, I think that would be the next point, like what climate adaptation is. So it is essentially getting used to your new reality. So what you do in order to sustain given the change, that is the adaptation. So people are being adapted to have a less sustainable lifestyle these days. And resilience is more to the future, like, okay, there is a disaster coming, so how we can prepare in order to combat it. So there's this difference, like adaptation is more into present and resilience is more future, towards future.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because there were also quite a few questions right now about what we can do with this whole thing because yeah, I think everything that you've described is it's quite sad and it's also very scary and yeah, maybe I think we all feel like, okay, what can we do right now? So maybe we can answer these questions. Now, and the first complex is maybe what's happening in Bangladesh right now. So what are politics doing? What are people doing to yeah, for adaptation, for resilience? Can you give us your insights there?
Um, Before we get there, I think it is important to mention that the scientists have been actually talking about this for a while now, and finally they managed to convince 100 and the leaders of 196 countries in 2015 to agree to something called Paris Agreement, and it is a legally binding agreement where the countries decided that okay, what we were doing is destroying the world, and they decided in based on scientific evidence. Let me reiterate it, scientific evidence, because people say that okay, no scientist ever said with certainty that climate change is real. Well, that is the way science works. No scientist will ever tell you with 100% 100% certainty that this will happen. What they give you is a prediction and a probability. So the scientists say that there is a real probability that we as humankind will not sustain given the rate we were emitting greenhouse gases and with the way the earth is warming up. So the countries decided that okay, by the year 2050, what we will do is that we'll try to um, reduce the temperature to 1.5 degrees to pre-industrial level. And each of the countries, there is a contention that okay, each country has to share the burden, that they will reduce, like collectively they will reduce the global greenhouse gas emission by 70%. That was the agreement, right? And now each country have decided or allocated a number of percentage that they will slash off their emission uh, by that number by the year 2050. Now the smaller countries, the developing countries, the undeveloped countries, they said, okay, that is unfair. The developed countries have already have an edge. They are already developed. They are the ones who are responsible for this mess to begin with. Where did industrial revolution take place? It took place in Europe. So they have the edge. Why should we take the burnings for it? So that's naturally uh, the Western countries, they said, okay, calm down. We got a plan. So each country has a percentage where they can slash. Now, Charlie, can you pull out that map we talked about?
Yes, 1 second. Right here. So to everyone, this is a really cool map. It's called carbonmap.org, and here you can see the world in different views regarding to climate change. Rubana, which one do you want to see? The
So
people are
I
big.
want to So this is the map.
Yeah.
Let's just say first the emission, like which countries. Okay, this is the historical, like which countries have the historically highest number of emission. We can see the European countries, they are all red, like Republican red. And then the countries in Asia, for example, they are green. They are rather, yeah, don't know quite, the industrial revolution didn't quite touch them. And now look at the map at the emissions. You see the emissions in Europe have has decreased and the emission in Asia has increased. And yes, it has two reasons. One, in European Union, in addition to Paris Climate Agreement, there is a policy called like net zero emission, where the countries in EU, they will go to zero carbon. They will turn into they have targeted to become net zero emission countries. And there is a concept in Bangla called Shubhankarar Faki. It literally means, like, the concept is that in order to tweak the statistics, in order to make a solution out of it. So yeah, I understand that Europe has the goodwill of turning into net zero countries, but are they really doing it by changing their consumer behavior or cutting down their consumption? Where do you think these countries with the highest emission, what do they do exactly to have the number that big? They actually produce products which are exported to Europe. So a lot of European Western countries, what they do, they are just, instead of taking part in cutting down consumption or slashing greenhouse gas emission, they are just exporting their problem elsewhere. So yes, it is net zero, but there is a huge but in between.
Okay, so you're saying like the whole concept of climate change responsibility, it sounds very, very, very complicated because yeah, we have these historical emissions and then we have like developing countries or countries in Asia right now who do have higher emissions, but then again they export lots of goods into Europe again. So actually you could say these emissions are still European emissions. Yeah, and it's not that simple.
It's not, definitely not. There are lots of variables associated.
Yeah. And so if I understand you correctly, one other thing you said, because yeah, we had the question of what can we do in Germany, what can the UN do and everything. And one thing you said right now was, okay, before we even talk about adaptation and yeah, resilience building and everything, the most important thing we can do is to cut our emissions and to help combat climate change so that all these impacts and climate migration and everything doesn't even happen in the first place. Is that right?
That is one aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
but that is at the well, that at the individual level. But there are also certain things that we should consider. First of all, that it's not that the countries who are vulnerable to climate change, they are just sitting there and doing nothing. They are have programs in hand where they are trying to figure out how they can adapt to this new reality. So in order to illustrate that point, I think it's important to show a video.
Yeah, we have a video on how Bangladesh.
More than 1 million people in Bangladesh depend on fisheries for their livelihoods, but climate change threatens these livelihoods through floods, droughts, and other damaging consequences.
সুন্দরবনে তো এর আগে যে মাছ ছিল তাতে দেখা যাচ্ছে আমাদের পাস পারমিট নিয়ে 1-2 দিন মারলে আমাদের কভার হতো। এখন তো পাস পারমিট নিয়ে সে পাস পারমিটই আমাদের এখন খরচাটাই মানে চালানোটাই দুষ্কার।
এবং আমরা চাষিরা একটা সময় যারা মাছের উপর নির্ভরশীল ছিলাম, এই পেশাটি যখন দুর্যোগের কারণে যখন ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ হয়ে যায় তখন আমরা শতভাগ মৎস্য দপ্তরের উপর নির্ভরশীল হয়ে যাই। কারণ প্রাকৃতিক উৎস থেকে আমরা এখন মাছ পাই না, এখন আমাদের মাছ নিজেদেরই একেবারে নার্সারি থেকে এনে উৎপাদন করতে হয়।
আগে প্রচুর বৃষ্টি হয়েছে, এখন বৃষ্টি নেই, গরমের সময় গরম নেই, এগুলো ঠিকঠাক বুঝতাম না যে কেন হচ্ছে এগুলো। এখন এগুলো আমাদের এই প্রজেক্টের মাধ্যমে আমরা জলবায়ু সম্পর্কে কিছু প্রশিক্ষণ পাইছি।
FAO is committed to building the resilience of fishers to deal with these challenges. The community-based climate resilient fisheries and aquaculture development project is helping fishers to adapt.
প্রকল্পটি বাংলাদেশের দুটি হটস্পটে, একটি হাওড় এলাকায় এবং একটি সুন্দরবন সংলগ্ন এলাকায় দেশের মোট 6টি জেলার 9টি উপজেলায় বাস্তবায়িত হচ্ছে।
আমাদের আগে তো ট্রেনিং এইগুলো আসতো না, এখন এই বাগেরহাট এই অফিসের মৎস্য অফিসের কর্মকর্তারা এসে স্যাররা এসে আমাদের বোঝাচ্ছে এইভাবে করলে আপনারা মানে ফল পাতে পারেন। এখন সেইভাবে আমরা চেষ্টা করতেছি। অফিস থেকে যেমন বলা হয়েছে যে আপনাদের দেখা যাচ্ছে যদি অতিরিক্ত পরিমাণ লবণ ঢুকে যায় গেরে, তখন আপনারা কি করবেন? আপনারা যদি কলা গাছ টুকরো টুকরো করে গেরে বাসায় দেন লবণ ঢোকা মাত্র, দেখা যাচ্ছে লবণাক্ততার পরিমাণটা অনেকটা কমে যাবে।
আমরা এখানে হচ্ছে মিশ্র চাষ, যেটা ধান মাছ একসাথে পাড়ে সবজি। এখন এই জমিটায় একই সাথে সবকিছু করা হচ্ছে যে আমরা একই সময়ের ভিতরে ধানও পাচ্ছি, মাছও পাচ্ছি, আবার শাকসবজিও লাগাইতে পারতেছি, সবকিছু এক জমির ভিতরে পাচ্ছি, অল্প জায়গার ভিতরে আমরা অনেক কিছু করতে পারতেছি।
প্রত্যেকটা সিবিও গ্রুপে আমরা 25 জন করে সদস্য নির্বাচিত করেছি এবং আমরা এখানে এবছর 5 ধরনের কার্যক্রম বাস্তবায়ন করছি। খাঁচাই মনোসেক্স, তেলাপিয়া চাষ, পুকুরে মাছ চাষ, ধান খেতে গলদা, বাগদা বা কার্প জাতীয় মাছের মিশ্র চাষ, পেন কালচার এবং সর্বশেষ জাল বুনন মহিলাদের।
FAO এবং বাংলাদেশ সরকার তথা মৎস্য অধিদপ্তর যুগপৎ কাজ করে যাচ্ছে। কারিগরি এ সহায়তার আওতায় প্রাপ্ত ফলাফল এবং শিক্ষা আমরা আমাদের কার্যক্রমে অন্তর্ভুক্ত করছি এবং এই জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রভাব থেকে দীর্ঘমেয়াদে সুরক্ষা পাওয়ার জন্য এ ধরনের কার্যক্রম অব্যাহত রাখা প্রয়োজন। আমরা আশা করছি যুগপৎ, মৎস্য অধিদপ্তর, FAO সহ অন্যান্য সংস্থা কার্যক্রম অব্যাহত রেখে দেশকে সেই সমৃদ্ধির পথে এগিয়ে নিয়ে যাবে এবং আমাদের সোনার বাংলার স্বপ্ন একদিন সার্থক হবে।
The work of FAO not only benefits many families and communities, but wider social and economic development in Bangladesh, as well as food and nutrition security.
Rubana, do you want to start?
Yes. So now that we have established that the countries are doing the best they can with the help of different government and international organizations to combat the impact of climate change, it is important to think that it is not all that we can do. First of all, at the beginning of the stream, as you have noticed, that we don't have anything to legally protect the climate refugees. And it is not a scientific debate whether climate change is real, but a political one. So it needs to find a political solution, right? And who can take that political decisions? The future voters and taxpayers. So that's you. And about that climate agreement we talked about in Paris, it took place during the Obama administration in the US. So what happened that all the countries who actually signed this kind of agreements, for example, the Refugee Convention or the climate change agreement in Paris, they have to sign it there, and it can only be legally binding when they go back to their countries and pass it into law in their own parliaments. Then only it becomes just, tightly bound. The US never did it. What happened that at that time the Republicans had the majority in the House, so they blocked the bill. And when Trump became president, they pulled out of Paris Agreement. And then in 2021, during Biden administration, the US re-entered the agreement. And now that Trump is the president again, we can unhopefully decide what is about to happen. So this is the kind of political decisions which affect our globe. And it is not only that, these international organizations which work on combating the climate effects of climate change, who fund them? These countries, GIZ for Germany, US aid for America, UK aid for the UK, organizations like that, they have their programs to combat the effect of climate change and climate adaptation. What will happen when the governments decide that we won't fund any more climate related projects? These programs will die down, and who will have to face the burden of it? The people who are already living on the fringes. So that's one of the aspects of what can be done from Germany. It is not just the Green Party who should focus on the effect of climate change. Everybody, every single one of you, whatever your political position or situation is, affiliation is, you have to come together and make it an agenda for your own party and your own constituents, make them accountable to pass it into law to protect the climate refugees. And the next thing is how we interpret the narrative set by certain political parties or media that these illegal immigrants, these economic migrants. The thing is, by definition, one has to cross the border in order to be considered an asylum, to seek asylum, to be even considered a refugee. So it can be legal or illegal. If they cannot have that opportunity, what are they? Schrodinger's migrants?
So you're saying like what we can do is use our political voice for migrant rights and everything. Yeah.
Yes, that, and take every narrative with a healthy amount of criticism.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I also want to share one other thing with you because you know the question from the beginning. And one answer was what Joydeep, the farmer, can do is network with people and who have similar problems. And I think that's also one aspect what we are doing right now, and what you can start doing today is just network and talk about these topics. Share this video with Rubana. Inform yourselves on how people are adapting to climate change in Bangladesh right now, because we can learn from these countries, and just share all these views and try to, influence politics together. So thank you very much, Rubana, for this lesson. I thought I learned so much, and I also really want to try to inform myself more on what's happening in Bangladesh right now. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. And now, sorry that we have a delay of a few minutes right now, but I just want to conclude the lesson with one information, because we do have another task. So if you want to work on this whole topic afterwards in your lesson, you can just go on our website, and we have a worksheet where you can write a speech for a climate conference in the year 2050. Little spoiler, and so have fun with this task, and then I only want to say thank you for everyone for watching. Thank you to all you teachers, all you students. If you want to see more of the Public Climate School, then just check out the lesson tomorrow, and have a nice day.